But if I can please ask Madam City Clerk if she can call to, or do roll call, please.
Mayor Arizmendi.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Delmar.
Here.
Councilmember Capocha.
Here.
Councilmember Goss.
Here.
And Councilmember Harvey.
Here.
Present. Thank you. And if we can all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Right hand over your heart. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we can go ahead and have a seat. I don't necessarily have an invocation or words of inspiration tonight, but two things I just want to draw our attention to. First was really the surprise of this morning's announcement with Mayor Ed Lee of San Francisco and his passing. He was not a good friend, but he's someone that I knew, and I served on a board with him at the League of API Caucus, and it really was shocking to learn of his news. He really has been a pioneer in the work he's done in San Francisco, being one of the first API mayors of the city, but really in the work that he's done in public service. So I do want to recognize that and express words of prayer and thought to his family and to San Francisco as they go through this transition. The second thing I wanted to note too is we continue to see a growing fire. Unfortunately, I haven't heard any updates with the Thomas fire this afternoon, but we do know as of this morning it's ranked one of the fifth largest wildfire in the state. As of Monday evening, it was at 231,000 acres. We know that there are still many homes that are at risk, and we also know there are many people who lost their homes. And the people have injured. So many thanks to our firefighters out there, and we continue to express thanks, appreciation, and also prayers and hope for all of them. So if you can all just say a word with them tonight, I think that would be appreciated. So our next item is a report out from closed session. Madam City Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. The council met in closed session with legal counsel this evening to get a briefing on a matter of anticipated or potential litigation. Direction was provided to staff and the city attorney. No action was taken, and that is the end of my report, Mayor.
Great, thank you very much. For the next item, approval of agenda, I do want to note that we did get a cancellation for the presentation from Director Tom Lev of San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District. So I wanted to note that and ask if I can get approval of the agenda with that change.
I'll move with that change.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and that motion carries. So next item is Mayor and City Council reports. Does anyone have anything to report?
Thank you. I attended the first LACE board, the LA Community Choice Energy Board meeting on Wednesday, and of last week I was accompanied by management analyst Carlson. And so far I think there's 7 cities that are part of the LACE board, and there will be anywhere from, they say, 7 to 15 cities that will be signing up momentarily. So the board is actually going to be growing pretty quickly, pretty soon here. And on the meeting on Wednesday, we actually adopted rates for the Phase 1 properties, which was all county-owned facilities. So it doesn't affect us here in Sierra Madre. It doesn't affect the residents or our businesses. The Phase 2 process will be to come up with rates and a process for all other commercial and retail buildings and ratepayers, coming up with a process to come up with rates and a process for them to actually opt into LACE versus staying with Edison. And then after that, Phase 3 will actually be for residents, I believe. Basically, the 3 different options that we're going to try to come up with will be, if a resident wants to opt in and pay less, they can do that. The energy that they will be consuming will be roughly the same as what Edison is providing in terms of how green it is and how not green it is. If they want a greener option where, for example, in Phase 1, we just adopted 60% green energy, which is actually pretty phenomenal, then they'll be paying about the same amount that they would for Edison. And then if you want to pay more, but you want to be greener, there'll be an option where the energy that you'll be consuming will be a very high percentage, whether it be wind, solar, or something else that is economically or environmentally friendly. So it's going to take a long time to do it. Right now we really are just baby steps trying to figure out the structure and who's going to lead it, hiring an executive director. But it should be a lot of work. It's complicated stuff. I think it's like grad school. So, I think it'll be a work in progress. So
Okay.
I'm thankful for management analyst Carlson for being there. So
When we thank you for stepping up to be a representative.
no problem. I'm happy to do it. So.
I wanted to report that I did get a chance to attend the Honors Award Citizen of the Year banquet on Thursday night, along with my colleagues up here. I thought it was an absolutely fantastic event, and I mean that. And staff did a great job. Chamber of Commerce did an amazing job setting it up. Steve Kerba did a wonderful job, and our mayor did a wonderful job of emceeing the event. It was one of the best events I've been into in years.
Oh, thank you.
And I will just add to that that all the award recipients are listed in the Mountain View News. If you haven't had a chance to grab that copy, please do.
Thanks, Mayor Pro
And you
Tem.
may see a picture of the mayor.
Maybe.
Or 6.
Thanks. So not to belabor the point, but because we did make a change in how we do operate and oversee the honors dinner, it was great to see the transition went well. We had change in venue, but we also had change in how much time and resources are allotted to it. So thank you to all of those that stepped up, including the chamber and all of the other entities that helped participate and set up and organize the event. So I did get really great feedback from folks, so thank you to all of you. And also just quickly report, I also serve on the California League of Cities board, and I may have reported what the 4 strategic goals are, but I just wanted to reiterate those because the focus of the League of Cities really is to ensure that we at the local level continue to have local control. I do understand that anytime league folks or local electeds go to state assembly and state senate, they almost cringe when they hear local control. But at the same time, that's really what we hear about. We don't want to give that up at the state level. But the 4 areas that the league is focusing on is increasing for critical transportation and water infrastructure, developing realistic responses to the homeless crisis, improve the affordability of workforce housing and secure additional funds for affordable housing. And lastly is to address public service impacts on reduced sentencing laws, protect local priorities as it relates to Adult Use of Marijuana Act, preserve the city rights to deliver emergency medical services. And considering those goals, some of these are not really impacting Sierra Madre, but to some degree they might because how it affects us regionally. But some of these really do hit us really close to home, especially as it relates to safety impacts. So I hope to continue to advocate for some of the small cities. We have a lot of big cities and rural cities that are represented on the league board, and I don't always get our voices. I get our voices heard, but they don't always support some of those issues on what they decide as a league to support. But that's why I hope that I will continue to serve in that manner so that we can make sure that small cities like Sierra Madre have a seat at that table. So with that, I'll move on to the next item. Again, we do not have our presentation tonight. So the next item is public comment. If anyone would like to come up to the podium to address any items that are not listed on the agenda, please come forward. You can state your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes to make any comment for items that are not on the agenda. And while that is happening, I'm going to ask Management Carlson if you'd be so kind to move the flag just a tad bit over, because I watch the TV to look at everyone else. Thank you. Okay, seeing no one coming up to the podium, we'll move on to action items in our consent calendar. And Mr. City Manager, I'll hand that over to you.
Mayor, we have 2
Thank you.
items on consent this evening. Item A, adoption of Resolution 1767 of the City Council of the City of Sierra Madre approving certain demands. Item B, recommendation to approve the notice of completion for the emergency replacement of 900 feet of water main in Manzanita Avenue and Sierra Place.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any questions that City Council would like to ask Mr. City Manager on those 2 consent items?
Not for me.
Right.
Just have a quick comment. I see that we saved the came in less than what we anticipated. So that means there's more money left for other water main projects, so that's really good news. So.
Another quick comment. I know two people down on Manzanita are absolutely ecstatic about this change in the city.
Okay. Well, then can I entertain a motion?
So moved.
Public.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just jumping the gun on that. Sorry. Thank you. Do we have any public comment on the consent calendar on these two items? Seeing none?
And I'll second. Did we already have a second? Sorry.
We didn't even have a motion first.
Well, I moved.
You moved? Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and that motion carries unanimously. Okay, the next item we have on discussion is item number 2, Resolution 17-68, and I think Management Analyst Carlson will be here to present.
Yes, thank you, and good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council members. The San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments is requesting that its member agencies consider the approval of this Fourth Amendment to the Joint Powers Agreement. This amendment would create a new standing committee named the Capital Projects and Construction Committee, joining the existing Executive, Transportation, Homelessness, Water, and EENR committees, which all report to the governing board. The creation of the Capital Projects and Construction Committee also fulfills the COG's strategic goal of migrating and expanding the role of the previous standalone Alameda Corridor East Construction Authority, often known as ACE, into their traditional organizational structure. So at this time, staff is recommending that the City Council adopt Resolution 1768, approving the Fourth Amendment to the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments Joint Powers Agreement, and authorize the mayor to execute on behalf of the city. And with that, I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Analyst Carlson. Do we have any questions that we have at this time on this report? Okay. Seeing none, I will open this up for public comment to see if anyone in the public would like to comment on this discussion item for Resolution 17-68 on the COG and the Joint Powers Agreement. Seeing none, I'll bring this back for discussion.
Well, I feel I should comment a little bit about it as the COG representative, but the way I understand this came about is that with the ACE projects winding down in the next couple of years, the COG had built with ACE a very competent project management organization that has brought, I think, every project that they've worked on time and under budget, basically. And with the passage of Measure M, there would be more opportunities to take local control of our project management of what happens with Measure M money within the San Gabriel Valley. So in that sense, it's really a good thing. The concern I have is that we also now have a homeless coordinator, and we're taking on some positions that I think are a little different from what the COG has traditionally done. So I'm in favor of this, but I did have some concerns when it was being developed. Now that the ACE board is now a committee of the COG and reporting now to the full COG board, but honestly, we don't really know a lot about construction. So. But this is the recommendation after months and months of subcommittee meetings to come to this, and so I'm willing to accept it as long as some of the traditional roles of the COG, like some of the advocacy that we've had, are not compromised. I don't think they will be, since I've been on the board. I've seen they've hired some really good people and have been very active in a lot of things like fighting the NPDES problem and other issues with water and different things. So I'm going into it wide open, thinking that it's not going to hurt us as far as our interests in Sierra Madre, because I don't think we're going to benefit a lot from these construction projects. None of it is up our way. So I think it's going to pass overwhelmingly whether we liked it or not anyway. So.
although I have not been involved with the COG, the one meeting that I was the alternate for Councilmember Kapochin was the one where they did approve this piece. And just my observations is a lot of it in agreement with yours, Councilmember Capoche. I don't know if we're necessarily going to benefit directly, but I think considering that ACE was going to phase out, the opportunity for new construction was available in a lot of the participating cities. I think it does create an opportunity. With that being said, if there is concern in terms of the organizational structure, this will be an opportune time because they will be bringing in a new executive director to oversee it. There is an interim person in place. The executive director I believe, is retired now.
Yes.
Correct? So this might be a good opportunity to help shape some of that organizational structure with some of those concerns to ensure that some of the primary benefits that we've been able to receive out of the COG, that we can continue to get that, like the advocacy piece. But I agree. I think despite what we approve here or not approve, it's going to pass overwhelmingly with all of the members.
Yeah, I'm in favor of this. There's a long tortured history here that will spare everyone, but for years, the COG, while I was the representative, we debated what to do with ACE, and at one point we were going to spin off ACE into its own JPA, and it was going to operate independently, and then about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, the direction changed, and I think it changed correctly because I think ACE has a lot of value. So I didn't know, the only question I had was what the executive director of ACE, is he now just going to be a COG employee, or is he, do you know what's going to happen to him, or is?
The
ACE,
Mark.
yeah, Mark.
Christophels,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. I think the intent was to get the new executive director in place, and he may be a candidate for that job as
Right.
well.
Yeah,
So.
he'd be good. Yeah, I'm in favor of it, so.
Okay. Any other comments, items of discussion? Okay, do I have a motion on this matter?
I'll move to approve it as the COG representative.
Do you want a second?
No, I'll give that to you
All
since
right,
you've been
second.
involved.
Yeah, second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And that motion carries. No, I think I did public
Yeah,
comment.
we opened it, no one came forward.
Thank you. So that motion carries unanimously. Okay, the next item on discussion is consideration of amendment Sierra Madre Municipal Code Section 10.52.030 on yellow and red flag days. And I think we're going to be asking Acting Fire Service Director Mike Goth to present on this matter.
Excuse me. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, Mr. City Manager. What we're going to do tonight is have a discussion and present to City Council some options for the red flag ordinance. Some numbers I'd like to give you real quick since we're in the middle of fire season right now. And fortunately, it's not affecting me, but where I live, it's only 10 miles away from my house.
Oh.
And it has affected a lot of my friends and my coworkers. The Thomas Fire currently is at 258,000 acres. They're looking at still 15,000 homes threatened. They've lost over close to 800 homes. They currently have over 6,000 fire personnel and other support personnel working on it. They have 6 shelters open, 1 fatality, and 5 injured at this time. You have the Rye Fire, which was burning up in Santa Clarita, which is now contained. That burned over 6,000 acres, destroyed 6 structures. The Creek Fire burned over 15,000 acres and destroyed 60 structures. The Lilac Fire down in San Diego burned 4,000 acres and destroyed 151 structures. And the Skirball Fire burned 422 acres and destroyed 6 structures. Those numbers I wanted to give you were kind of an idea of what happens when a fire starts, especially under red flag conditions. And just for reference sake, the Thomas Fire started in the city of Santa Paula at roughly 6:30 last Monday. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, it had burned 13 miles to the west and reached the western and central border of the city of Ventura. So it can burn quickly. So that brings me to what we're looking at here. The 2 objectives that we're looking at is, number 1, to discuss with City Council what Sierra Madre Municipal Code 10.52.030 is, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. and also give information to City Council about red flag warning conditions and their definition. So a little history on this municipal code. This municipal code started because of a fire. This started because of the Santa Anita fire, which started on April 26, 2008, off of Santa Anita Road. It burned for 3 days and burned 538 acres. While there was no structures that were damaged, because of the large swath that it covered, it left a lot of the hillside denuded. And that means that there's no grass, there's no shrubs, and there's no trees to hold the dirt in place. You then have what is known as a watershed issue. So with that in place and with rains coming, there was a high probability of a debris flow. When you look at the debris flow, this is where rain will mix with the loose dirt and the topsoil, and it forms mud. And because it's not a thick mud, it's going to make a run and follow through topographic influences. And the way the canyon is, if most folks here in the city probably know how the upper and lower canyon are designed, that mud's got only one place to go, and that's into the city streets. So what happened there is the city got together, they identified the areas at risk, which was mainly the upper canyon, lower canyon, Mount Wilson Trail, and the area east or west of Santa Anita within the city of Sierra Madre limits. Once they've identified the areas at risk, an evacuation plan was created, and then we looked at what we needed to do, and then a draft ordinance was created that was similar to LA County. This involved 3 flags, a green flag, a yellow flag, and a red flag. A green flag meant that a rain was coming, but we didn't feel that there was a mud flow imminent. A yellow flag meant to prepare, rain was coming, possibility of mud flow, and then the red flag indicated that there was imminent mud flow to come, and that there was no parking, and that an evacuation was needed of the canyon area. And this was the adoption of Municipal Code 10.24.030 up there, as you see. Okay. And what this did is this basically identified areas up in the canyon, lower and upper canyon, and on Mount Wilson Trail where there was no parking. That way, folks could be allowed to evacuate in a timely manner if they needed to get out in case of a mud flow. So why have I given this long history on the mud flow? We'll get back now to why we're here. So this is the wildland and urban interface that we are living up against now. The high fire area for Sierra Madre is defined as anything north from the north side of Grandview Avenue, north all the way up into the forest, since we abut the Angeles National Forest. The fire threat is real. 1976, we had the Santa Anita Road fire. 1978, they had the Mount Wilson Trail fire. And in between, they had the Kenaloa fire, which was more to the west of the city, but still involved a section of it. And then in 2008, the Santa Anita fire. Now, you look at the gaps in there. The last fire that we had was the Santa Anita fire, which was almost a decade ago. That means that there's a lot of growth that has come back in, because can anybody remember a red flag or mud flags going up recently? Because the hillside's grown back, which brings us to the next issue that we have. This would be the development. So the Lower Canyon. Lower Canyon was developed in the early teens and 20s prior to any of our modern codes. A lot of the places there were designed for summer use, and they've now become 24-hour occupational. You also have the Upper Canyon. The code issues that you have up in these areas include less than 20 feet width, which is your modern standard code for most of your streets. You have 0 lot lines on some of the property lines, meaning that the house takes up pretty much most of the property, which then creates no defensible space. And if you've been watching the news coverage, a lot of the homes that were saved had defensible space, which unfortunately up there, because of the development, is going to be difficult. So this brings us to our canyon access. Now, the first reason that we're looking at having an amendment to this section to include no parking on red flag fire weather days is not only because of the fire apparatus access, which I'll get to in a minute, but it's mainly for evacuation. Again, our primary focus is life, then property, and then environment and incident stabilization. When you look at that, life is more important, and the ability for folks to get out of there is going to be very difficult, just as difficult as it is for our apparatus to get up there. So as we illustrate on the left, this is a map of the canyon area. The green indicates areas that we can get a fire engine up. Yellow indicates limited access, and the pink indicates no access. So as you look at that, you can see that 35% of the canyon gives us either limited or no access via a Type 1 fire engine. And for reference, a Type 1 fire engine is what is in the picture there on the lower right. It's about, depending upon the size, they're anywhere from 8 to 10 feet wide. So this also will give you an idea of the canyon access. So this is Upper Canyon. This is on Skyline Drive. The vehicle that's parked on the left is approximately 6 feet wide. The vehicle parked in a legal parking space up on the right-hand side is about 6 feet wide. And as you can see, there's barely enough room for the white vehicle on the left to get through. This is an idea on just normal conditions, and this was taken 3 days ago during red flag fire weather. So what we're here to do is to provide a proposal to City Council to amend the ordinance. What we would like to do is to include red flag fire weather days to the no parking for the mud flags, and then give you the definition of what a red flag fire day is. And the definition has to have 3 items that are included in it. And that is sustained wind with an average of 15 miles per hour or greater, a relative humidity of less than 25%, and a temperature of greater than 75 degrees. My apologies for that. And just to give you an idea, the relative humidity was 8% with a temperature of 78 degrees at 10 o'clock this morning. Though we haven't had any winds, we did meet those ideas. And to give you an idea, prior to this last week, we're pretty much the last 8 days, including the next 2 have been red flag fire weather definition days. We would have only had about 7 days prior to that in this fire season up until October. Up until December. So what this is this would be a similar ordinance to what the City of Los Angeles and Pasadena already do. When the Skirball fire occurred, the City of Los Angeles had red flag no parking in effect, and Pasadena had the same thing in effect also. So they're similar. They have similar areas to our canyon area at this point. So that will conclude the presentation. I'll be open for any questions. Sir?
Just a quick one. Do we have to, did you say that we have to meet those 3 conditions, 15 miles per hour or greater, wind, and less than 25%?
Yes, sir. The National Weather Service identifies those 3 items. If any one of those 3 items is not met, then it's going to be not defined as a red flag warning day.
Yeah. Is it going to be a little confusing? I mean, we have signs today that have, it's red flag for mud flow.
Yes.
I don't think, the sign says that, but how are we going to deal with red flag mud versus red flag fire?
When staff looked at this, we looked at what would be the easier way to put this in to create a new ordinance or to dovetail onto another ordinance. So we were looking at dovetailing onto this ordinance since the signs were already up. Most people are aware of what it is. There will be obviously some educational components if this is adopted that will go through it.
Yeah.
And the rewrite of the ordinance took very little time.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to have a discussion with City Council to determine if they wanted us to continue with the amendment or go back and actually create a separate ordinance that would be defined as a red flag warning days.
Yeah, okay. And you also said that you had about how many days this year that would have qualified for red flag fire?
Prior to this last week, we would have had about 4 days where we would have had this in effect. And obviously for the last week, we total would be, including next Wednesday, because it's been extended through Wednesday at 8 o'clock, we would have had 10 days in a row. And we do realize, staff does realize that this will put some hardship on the folks who do not have adequate parking up there, but we feel that this inconvenience in the name of public safety and being able to protect life and property up there can supersede. And we can also address it and look at the judicial nature and not just issue this just because we feel it needs to be issued. So it will be not just thrown about carelessly.
Yeah.
Do we have a sense of, if we implement the red flag day, how notice goes out to the residents, where they're going to be parking? I mean, it seems administratively to be somewhat of a nightmare, and I don't know if we've thought through it, and where do we think all those cars are going to go?
Okay. And again, this,
Yeah, how many cars exactly?
this is why we brought it for discussion rather than bringing it up as an amendment. We wanted to open it up and have this open hearing. When you look at the parking is already very limited up there. A survey was done back in 2008 by the fire department when they were looking to present this back then after the Santa Anita fire. Just roughly looking at that survey, which obviously is almost a decade old, this would have affected probably, they surveyed it over a week and counted cars. I believe it was close to 30 cars that were up there, but it could have changed. To answer your question, parking at this point, staff's discussion would be having, allowing those folks to park down on Mountain Trail or on Alegria. Those areas down there where it's a wider road, where if they are parked, we can still get up and in. And then discuss with the police department to not enforce in those areas during red flag days, parking permits requirements.
And how do you give notice on a red flag day?
That would be the same way as they do now, which would be an e-blast. And then we also have
Nixle.
Nixle, thank you. Wanted to pronounce that correctly. We have Nixle, which we did not have back then, that we can use for reverse 911 notifications in the Canyon area. And then obviously through social media. And then the old-fashioned way is to hang a red flag outside of the fire station. And then there's 2 locations up in the lower and upper canyon where a red flag is hung for the mud days.
And then, yeah, just a discussion, but let's say a car is there, parked on a red flag day, what's the enforcement, mechanism? Do we give them a ticket? Do we give them a warning?
We would enforce the same way we do right now, illegal parking if it's overnight, where we'll try and door knock and contact the owner prior to ticketing, certainly prior to towing. We think the education and outreach will be important. We also think that Canyon residents are used to the red flag, so letting them know that the red flag is now for fire danger too. Most of our residents are keenly aware of the weather, and they know when there's fire danger in place. So over, I think, a short amount of time, the residents will be used to the red flag. Now, whether they're happy about where they're parking, I think that's a different issue.
Right. Thanks.
Just maybe to split hairs a little bit, when I hear about these red flag warnings, you typically hear about them on the radio or TV or on, WeatherBug on my phone. And do they do regional red flag warnings, or do we get Sierra Madre specific red flag warnings? How does that work?
They're not going to get specific in city regional, but they will have areas. So just like when you look at the National Weather Service, they'll put out a regional. So you can see, if you look at a map, how LA County is laid out.
If we're in the region.
Yeah, so we would be in the region. Sometimes you see it's the upper region, which is mainly the high desert, or sometimes it's the entire county. Where I live up in Ventura County, they have a lot of times they have it split because the upper mountains don't get it. So it is regional based.
So what I was getting is, I've seen it on the weather maps on TV where the red flag is not includes us, but includes other parts of the area.
Correct.
In that case, we're not going to get our red flag up.
No, sir. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so we will.
I guess I just have one. So currently we have a red flag
Yes, ma'am.
alert, right? How many, during those 4 days, I think you said, how many times did you have to go and knock on the doors and get people to move their cars off the road?
We have no enforcement at this point in time, so there was no enforcement effort.
No, for the mud flow days.
No. Those 4 days we were discussing, those were red flag days for fire weather.
For fire.
My apologies.
Okay.
We haven't had when's the last time we had a mud flow red flag? It was,
To my recollection, talking with other staff members, the last time was probably 2010.
Oh, that's been a while.
yeah, the mud flow danger subsided when the undergrowth came back.
It subsided, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We may have you back, but let's go ahead and open this up for public comment. If you could please state your name, your address, and you have 3 minutes.
I won't give you my exact address for security purposes,
Okay.
but my name's Natalie Cortez, and I'm a resident at Skyland Drive. I'm a first responder. I did work the Creek Fire that just recently occurred, and I worked the Skirball. And prior to that, I worked the Tahunga Canyon Fire. I worked the evacuation branch. So I've seen it firsthand. It's getting really dangerous. And after the Tahunga fire that we had in September, I went home to my house after working about 17 hours, and I had fire department on my street because we had a fire up there by Mount Wilson. So seeing that, it then takes a whole different approach because it hits close to home. And when talking to my other fellow partners out there, first responders, their biggest difficulty was getting those fire trucks around those roads. If you look at Skyland Drive, and as he was talking about different types of engines, it just doesn't include Sierra Madre. This is a mutual aid. So you'll have different cities with different fire apparatuses come through. It was watching them be delayed because vehicles were parked. How do you explain 1 or 2 cars to a neighborhood that's potentially going to be lost? My daughter who won't have a home. So what I ask for this council is some forward thinking, some swift recommendations. I don't mind being inconvenienced because guess what? On that fire day when I came home, I was inconvenienced and I had no problems. My car that you just saw up there posted, that was my car. Moving my car as quick as I can down to Mountain Trail to help. So anybody who would have a concern, you know, maybe this will propel some of my neighbors to clean out their garages. So with that being said, I asked, like I said, for some swift and forward thinking. But I do want to bring one additional thing to light because not only are you talking about red flag postings in that area, we need to also consider surveying the red curb. There are currently, and this is probably something the fire can speak to, areas where the curb is not red, my neighbors park, and it's very difficult for even the UPS or the Amazon drivers to get through. And those were the cars that were making it difficult that day. So some new surveying potentially in the area would be also helpful. I know it may be inconvenience to few, but really, like I said, how do you say to a few when you lose a whole entire neighborhood? So thank you. I appreciate, like I said, some swift action, and I can answer any questions too.
I just want to say thank you for your service as a first responder.
Thank you.
Thank you and your comments.
Hi, Barbara Lee, Sierra Madre. I don't think we have to give our addresses anymore according to the California code. Anyway, most of us have been living in Sierra Madre for quite a few years, so we're all too familiar with what we do with the mudslides and the fires. And I think the last fire that we had, these guys did a terrific job, and also with a huge windstorm. The only thing I had trouble with when I was up in the canyon was a lot of graduation parties and people were drunk and didn't want to mandatory evacuate. As far as red curbs, it sounds like that's more revenue for the city to go up and issue some tickets because it is hard for the UPS to get up and around the canyon. But otherwise, people pretty much are aware in this town of the dangers. This is Sierra Madre. You'd be foolish not to know the dangers of this, you know. So kudos to the fire department. They've always been able to maneuver the canyon. I've never seen any troubles with that. And most of us will grab our shovels and hoses if need be. So anyway, maybe just a little blurb, a reminder in the water department bill of be alert. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. City staff received a request for public comment and to submit it for the record. The resident who sent the email requesting for public comment record is Natalie Cortez, and her email reads, "Hello, as a resident who resides in the Upper Canyon, specifically Skyland Drive, I am concerned that there is no enforcement of red flag fire days, no parking restrictions along Canyon Crest. Just this last September, we had fire crews who were delayed coming up the hill due to vehicles parked, making the street impassable. Any assistance would be appreciated during the high fire danger time." And this will be submitted into public record.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else in the audience that would like to comment on this item?
Just saying, Ms. Cortez got to comment twice, but they're good comments, so.
I didn't even put that together. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so I'll go ahead and bring this back for discussion to the council.
I would like to just add when I lived up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I was up there when they had the Oakland firestorm. And we lost 2 of the teachers at my daughter's school that day. And probably 4 or 5 different friends lost their homes. And the reason that our teachers lost their lives was they could not get down because of all the cars. And the fire trucks couldn't get up there in time. And the Oakland Hills reminds me very much of the canyon, the very narrow streets. And so I was actually very surprised when this came on the agenda because I couldn't believe we didn't have anything already on the books. And I do think that people need to, I know the convenience of parking in the street or maybe not parking in the garage, but when that firestorm went through in Oakland, it went through in a matter of minutes, not hours, not days. It was minutes, and those lives were lost. So I would just like us all to consider that. And with the dangers down here and the fires that we've seen, I would so be in favor of putting this into effect. And also an education series up in the canyon. If we haven't had anything since 2010, maybe we need to remind people about parking in the streets.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Well said. I think that this is very much needed. One could argue that you should have the no parking requirements all the time. I just think that a fire up in the canyon would be devastating. So I think this is totally reasonable.
I would just add, it's a very reasonable thing. And to hear that a first responder who lives right in the middle of it, with expertise and experience, can testify to the prudence of this, you've sold me. So I'm in favor of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to me, this is a no-brainer in the sense that when you're looking at life versus convenience, this is something I think we would need to do. So I'm in favor of this also.
And I would like to thank Ms. Cortez for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you. So at this time, are we looking for action on this item?
We will bring back an updated ordinance for council to consider the first meeting in January.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Okay, our last item for discussion is the consideration of Resolution 17-69, and I will ask Assistant City Clerk to present this item.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. At the November 28th City Council meeting, the City Council directed staff to prepare an advisory ballot question for the April 10th, 2018 general municipal election. Before you is a draft of that advisory measure resolution. City staff recommends that the advisory ballot measure resolution be approved at this evening's council meeting so it could be submitted along with all the other election resolutions. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Assistant City Clerk Aguilar, and thank you to staff for bringing this back in such a timely manner. We know they just requested for this at the last meeting. So given that, do we have any questions either for Assistant City Clerk and or for any other staff?
I do. One quick question, probably for City Manager, and maybe Chief Goff can help too. The thing that jumped out at me was the phrase "and return fire suppression to 100% volunteer service." I guess if we were to lose $2.6 million of our general fund, I mean, is that really something that would be, a reasonable solution to just return to a 100% volunteer service? Because I think at that point, wouldn't we just be totally outsourcing? I mean, I guess hypothetically, if we were to lose that much money, would we even be able to fund our volunteer fire department?
So we looked at the fire department in a couple of different ways and how if we lost this amount of revenue, how we'd respond. There was the idea of saying we're going back to the old days, 100% volunteer. We looked at the potential where you could split fire suppression from paramedics, so no longer have paramedic service in the city, and try and find a willing bidder to take on fire suppression only, which would save some funding, but not as much. And the third option would be to try and find a willing bidder to take on everything, though that would likely increase, not reduce costs. So I would say 100% volunteer force, or a mixture of saying, well, we'll pay 3 firefighters, 1 per shift, and everything else is volunteer. We'd have to work through it. But when we're talking about 26% of your budget, it's essentially, when you add police, fire, library, and community services together, I think that's a little over 80% of our budget here. So that's where the cuts are going to come from.
Okay.
But with that said, if we could change the language, I made a note actually to say 100% volunteer service or outsource.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's not
75 words, I don't know.
guarantee that it would be 100% volunteer force, but also we'd have to understand you'd have to find a willing buyer to take on the services. And I don't know if we could pay for that considering the reduction in revenue, and that would also depend on how everything up top went.
Right.
So it's hard to determine where it would shake out at.
Well, it's hard to fit it in 75
words,
words.
yes.
So I think that's probably the question is, even if you did outsource services, I didn't count, but,
You're under the 75.
okay, thank you.
I have a question. Is, you know, I just don't see how that is possibly even an option to go back to 100% volunteer service. It's just not even possible. How are you going to find qualified people that are just going to do it, volunteers? It's not going to happen.
That's correct. We likely would not. I mean, we're intentionally saying we will have spotty or no fire protection on some days. But
Right.
again, if we're saying it's a 25, 26% loss in revenue, council, when we come back, is going to have to make decisions, right? So if we talk about outsourcing police where there's savings,
Yeah.
great, but you have to go down the list.
I mean, is disincorporation, is that an option? I mean, do we just fold up the city and turn it over to the county
turn
and
it over to the
say,
county.
and just say, we're not a city anymore. We can't afford to be a city.
Well, under these options, I don't know the legal nature of disincorporation or what would have to take place, but, I mean, under these options, there'd be very few services left.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be accurate to say, since it is really not an option, is just to outsource fire?
We can change to reduce, we can change to outsource. I mean, at this point, again, what ultimately happens depends on the other six things that we've listed. So, for example, if we reduce code enforcement, which is an option because it's an immediate savings, that probably reduces long-term revenue. So we'd have to do an analysis on that. It's very difficult to determine where you would get $2.6 million from the span of the vote in April to adopting the budget in June 30th.
What about just stating eliminate professional fire services? Is that would that be an accurate statement?
I think that would certainly happen. The first step is we would no longer provide paramedic services. So those would go to the county, and then we'd have to deal with the fire service itself. So again, what we're talking about is likely a minimally paid and trained force, at best, at worst, a 100% volunteer organization that does not give us 24-hour per day coverage.
But as a voter, reading this, I think it's a little deceptive to say we can return to the fire suppression to 100%, because then you'll have people thinking, well, why don't we do that now?
We're fine with saying reduce or outsource.
Police services, library services,
We-
code enforcement. Code enforcement and fire services, because if you outsource but you don't have the revenue to pay for the outsourcing, because it's not free, then you essentially are going to reduce services down to what you can afford to pay for. So it would be a true statement, which is what we're shooting for in this description, to say if you lose this money, we are going to reduce have to reduce and outsource the following types of services, and frankly eliminate paramedic services, because that is something that we can legally do because it's the county's legal obligation under the Health and Safety Code to provide that.
So perhaps if we could do that, but I just find that sentence about fire suppression to volunteer services a little deceiving.
We could probably just say reduce and outsource.
So, I mean, I know we're getting into discussion too, so I want to make, well, I did it also. So I want to make sure that we have, we can ask any of the questions that we have for staff regarding this issue, and then I will open up for public comment so we can bring it out back for discussion. But are any of the specific questions that we have for staff?
No, I kind of asked mine in a roundabout way. Sorry.
Okay, no, I did too, sorry. So we'll open up for public comment.
Hi, Barbara Lee, public comment. Okay, since Sierra Madre is a full-service city, and we just reorganized the fire department, the debate's gone on for years. We knew that we never could afford paramedics in the first place, but that went on for years and years and years. So now we've reorganized. Looks pretty good now. I'd say that the city management and the council need to take a look at community services. What can you cut that's not mandated by the state? We're mandated to have a police force and a fire department. So you also have the library. You can sell the back lot, pay off what we need. But you're going to still see an increase. The UUT, I'm not sure what it's done at this point. And now it's coming up for a vote. It's going to continue. It's going to continue increasing how to run the city. And nothing is put in there about that. I've spent a lot of time here in council, and I have not seen a lot of savings come out of this council. Voters are going to check that out. I mean, it's not as bad as saving the paper clips and counting the paper that goes into the Xerox machine. But I think savings could come elsewhere than the fire department or the police department. Check out some of these contracts that have been written with some of these groups that we're paying for that we no longer run, that we used to run here in the city. So I think the homework is for the council to take a look and have a second plan B or plan C just in case the ordinance does not pass. But people are well aware that we need the UUT now at this point. But they're also very well aware that there's no savings coming out of this council. So, gonna get off my soapbox again, but you've got a lot of smart people in this town, and everybody's been keeping an eye on what's going on.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Do you have anyone else that would like to comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring this back for discussion.
What would $2.6 million be in terms of expenditures? Is that around the same? It's about a fourth of our expenditures, or not to put you on the spot?
Yeah,
but
it's a quarter of our general fund expenditures.
Okay.
So I've had a lot of conversations about this with community members who, same as our recent commenter, they'll say the same thing. So I give them the areas they can cut, and I let them pick the numbers. So we have still a group who says outsourcing police is the primary way to go, and I say, perfect, here's our budget for police. You pick the number, how much we'll save if we do that. And they'll say, we'll save $500,000. That number's not likely, but I let them do that. Then I say, let's close the library, that's the next option. We go down the option. If we do everything on this list, we still haven't gotten to a 24%, $2.6 million reduction. So again, even when people get to pick the numbers, this would be a catastrophic change. So to say we haven't reduced the budget, our budget this year is $1 million less than it was last year. So that is a significant savings in my opinion. We actually do count the paper that goes into the Xerox machine. We're signing a new contract in a couple of weeks to save money. But when we do this, even allowing people who have studied the problem and we allow them to pick the numbers, they don't have a way to get to 2.6 million. Even if you do close the library, outsource police, put paramedics, outsource fire, because you have an offset when you outsource. You don't save 1.8 million by outsourcing fire. You still have to pay someone to provide that service. So when when we tried to draft this, it's almost impossible to say what savings you would get, because if we're negotiating with a buyer for fire or police and they happen to notice that we've got 90 days to put together a contract for services, they may not be inclined to give us the best deal possible.
So even given the comment that was made about community services, I don't know if you know the total amount for community services, but approximately, even if we eliminated that altogether, that is only...
So when we add police, fire, library together, that is more than 80% of the budget. So again, to make the 24% cut, there's certain things that we can't eliminate that they're mandatory. We can make cuts to finance, for example, but you can't simply not have a finance department. You would have to operate. We'd make cuts across the board. Finding 24% would likely mean we're giving up a library, we're giving up control of police. We no longer have paramedics, and we have a big problem with fire. So again, it's hard to speculate what the outcome would be. We'd have about 90 days to reorganize a government.
And as much as we typically do not like to try and wordsmith, unfortunately, this is probably one time we will want to, because we only have 75 words. But I mean, I do agree that the 100% volunteer service is misleading, because we really can't go to that. That's not really an option.
Yeah, we can't.
But I did hear some possibilities of just using outsourcing or altogether and/or elimination. I'm not sure how to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the city attorney's recommendation, which would be, should the city council eliminate paramedic services, reduce and outsource police services, library services, code enforcement, and fire services, or fire suppression services, in addition to other reductions which will be required to balance the budget.
So just eliminate that 100% volunteer service.
Yeah, and I guess it would be reduce and outsource code enforcement,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I think that's a good option.
I think that's better. I still just want to put out, I mean, do we really want to do this, though? I mean, I think really the best way to kill this is to just do a public relations campaign, just like we did 2 years ago, and, educate the electorate on what's going on. It's really difficult to encapsulate it in 80 words. And
75.
75. And just how grave this problem is, as the city manager just explained. So I'm really not in favor of even putting this. I will vote with the majority for the sake of unanimity, but I'm just not feeling like this is really the right way to do it. I think the right way is to just have to educate our folks, which they already should be pretty well educated, because they passed the last utility tax, increasing it from 8 to 10% by 73% of the population. So this should be a much, much easier lift than what happened 2 years ago.
So I'm going to ask the silly question, but I know others are thinking. So if we put this on the ballot and the voters agree to eliminate our UUT, but they vote no to the advisory, what happens with that?
Advisory measures are just advisory.
Okay.
There's no action here that you could take without a lot of public hearings. You can't actually eliminate a library without going to a vote of the people, so you would either have to reduce the services so low without actually eliminating the library, or put that on the next ballot.
Okay.
Perhaps the city manager's explanation is kind of intriguing, of inviting people to take a shot at saying which things would you cut to get to the 2.6 million. If you did an advisory measure like that, perhaps it would be a good idea to have at least one community workshop, and this would to educate people for certain, but also to have this, have a table set up to have people try their hand at how you would budget this, and that at least would tend to match the advisory measure. So we're asking, what should we do? Should we do this? But at the same time, people would have the opportunity before they vote to actually seriously look at, could it be done? How would I do it? And it's not a bad idea that your city manager is suggesting.
But tonight, we just need to
just looking at this,
to get
yeah.
this on there, because we have to get it to the ballot, right? We have a deadline.
Yes.
And I don't know if it would hurt any, right?
We also don't know if it would cost more to have a second ballot measure. We haven't discussed that, but that's
Okay.
something for your consideration.
Okay. I'm okay with everything except for the return fire suppression to 100% volunteer service.
I am too.
I will say I'm still in support of putting an advisory measure on the ballot, and I think it's important for people to know that something will have to follow this if they vote one way or the other for no or yes on the UUT, to eliminate it or not. I had another thought that I wanted to share, and I cannot think of it now. So.
Well, my thought in the last campaign, the
Oh,
city
come on.
sent out information to our citizens about the potential impacts of the change, and I think that at a minimum we ought to be considering at some later date. Is
Oh, yeah.
all the potential
absolutely.
fiscal impacts
Right.
of whatever we do here, and I think we can do that in the water bill or maybe a separate mailing or both.
So that was my second thought. Thank you for reminding me. No, it was just to continue doing outreach. I mean, Councilmember Capocha mentioned that too. Is that, I think we were effective in the last election in making sure we got the message out. And I actually think it should be more than just putting something in our water bill, but conducting a couple of forums and really making this an effort as we did with the UUT in the last election. So thank you. That was my second thought, but I still think it's important to add the advisory measure on to the ballot.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm in support of it, but I do take your concern. It's imperfect. It doesn't encapsulate everything, and I don't think that this would supplant really the boots on the ground effort and the real campaign that a lot of volunteers are going to have to take up to defeat this thing. And hopefully it is easier than last time. But I do see, some benefit to getting folks to advise us on, do you want to see this happen? Is this really what you want to see? Yes or no? But it's imperfect. I mean, 75 words to try to encapsulate this is really tough. But I err on the side of putting it on because I think it is helpful to have the public weigh in. But I do think that this is not going to be, this isn't going to be the end of the efforts to educate the folks on what's happening, so.
Well, okay, so obviously, yeah, and I said I will vote with the
Yeah.
majority on this. One more comment, though. Should we spell out UUT, user utility tax?
It takes up 3 of the words.
No.
We'll be eliminating 100%
If we have
volunteer
the space, yeah, if we have the space, I think that we have room to spell that
I
out.
think we do now with the proposed.
Yeah.
We'll hyphenate it.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, just a follow-up question on the wording. Do we get a choice on what to name this measure?
Yes, this is our measure, and
No, well, the measure itself, so
Yes.
what we're referring to, okay.
but it is an advisory. It's an advisory vote. It's an
I
advisory
think she's
measure.
asking what
Yeah, if the measure passes.
The measure itself,
The one to repeal the UUT.
if
Yeah.
measure blank passes.
I
So
see.
do we
Yes.
get the blank?
Oh, the blank is, no, the county assigns the number or the letter. I think it's a letter in the case of a municipal ordinance, and we don't know yet what the county register is going to assign that letter.
Do we know, how do they do that? Does anyone know? I don't know if that's
In the past, it's been UU team.
So the elections official does get to select the measure, the measure, ballot measure, letter,
I see.
in this case.
So it's not assigned by the county, it is assigned,
Not for the local.
okay, for the local. Okay.
Well, I would make the motion to go forward with this based on my previous amendment language that was proposed. I don't know if we wrote that down or you want me to restate it, but.
You got it recorded.
Okay.
So we'll get it word
So
for word.
I would move with that amendment.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Wanted to find out from my colleagues here if there are any new items that you would like to bring for future agenda items.
No, but I would wish everybody and the staff and out there a happy holidays as we approach that season. This will be our last meeting for the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Merry Christmas, Happy
Yeah.
Hanukkah,
And
Happy Holidays.
And to the mayor's point, I would adjourn in honor of Mayor Ed Lee. You know, it's amazing. It's horrible for a council member to have one of their fellow, not in our city, but different city, to have a fellow mayor die unexpectedly on the job is really heart-wrenching. So definitely adjourn in his honor, in his memory.
Okay, with that, we will adjourn in Mayor Ed Lee's honor. And thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you, and that motion carries.